Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alyssa Krawczyk, and I'm Executive Director of the Lakeland Agricultural Research Association, and it is my pleasure to welcome Tom Wolf to our webinar today exploring water quality and spray drones, what you need to know. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all those who registered for the webinar within 1 to 2 weeks. Second, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions, and Tom will address these questions throughout the presentation. Please try not to type your questions into the chat function, as this can sometimes become very busy and questions may be lost, and we want to make sure that we get to all of your questions. With that, I would like to introduce Tom Wolf. Tom is based in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and has 35 years of research experience in the spraying business. He obtained his BSA and Master of Science in Plant Science at the University of Manitoba and his PhD in agronomy from Ohio State University. Tom focuses on practical advice that is research-based to improve the efficiency of producers. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Alyssa. Can you hear me?
Sounds
Excellent.
great.
Okay. So, welcome everyone. I will be talking for about 45 minutes today, and then there'll be about 15 minutes of questions and answers, hopefully. It can be interspersed, as Alyssa said. So just type it in, and I've got the box open, so I'll have a view of the questions. If they're appropriate for the moment in that time, I'll answer them right on the spot. Otherwise, we'll leave some questions for the end. So the first half of it will be spray water quality, and the second half will be spray drones. So I'm going to go share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, great. So hopefully everybody can see that. And then we'll start. So remember too that we have a website called Sprayers 101. It's a free website, sprayers101.com. It's a website that's paid for by Alberta commodity groups, such as Alberta Pulse, Alberta Canola, Alberta Grains, and they sponsor us so that we can develop content for it, but we don't have any commercial ties. So that's hopefully going to give us the opportunity to speak pretty frankly about issues affecting the spraying world. Okay, so the first question we're going to ask today is your water good for spraying? And I want to acknowledge Jim Reese, who's retired now, but he used to be with Precision Labs in Okatee, South Carolina. He gave an excellent presentation some time ago and agreed to share some of the content with me. So I adapted some of his slides. I just want to acknowledge that these are his brainchild. About a year in the summer, so 6 months ago, whenever summer was last, I don't remember. It was July. I was driving down Highway 3 towards Lethbridge, and as I entered the St. Mary's Irrigation District, I came across this tender truck who was just filling up. And I dropped in and introduced myself and asked if I could just observe what he was doing and ask him a few questions. And one of the things I noticed was that he had on the back of his tender system boxes, and I saw that there was interlock here, and that's a drift reducing adjuvant. And then he also had boxes of crimson. And because I found myself at a municipal water fill, which was treated municipal water, I asked him, Crimson is ammonium sulfate. It's a water conditioner for hard water. Why are you putting it in there? Like, I just wanted to get his thinking on it. And he said, we just don't want to guess. We want to be sure that this is going to work. And if there is, for some reason, an issue with the water, and for some reason, we have to use a different source of water, we have the Crimson on board, and we'll just use it and just have that insurance policy. And that's not the first time I heard that kind of an answer. I used to live in the US and when I studied, and back in those days, the custom applicators I spoke to also said that they like to add ammonium sulfate as an insurance policy, just in case something wasn't quite the way it should be with the water. Remember, testing is something you might only do once a year or once every few years to assure yourself that everything's fine, but maybe conditions can be changeable. So I kind of appreciated that concept. But really, what we should be doing is doing some kind of a scientific assessment of whether we need to treat this water. And for that, we have water tests. And these water tests are a little bit confusing, to be quite honest. This one's from quite some time ago, but they still kind of look the same. They have things like conductivity, pH, bicarbonates, calcium, and other cations, hardness, total dissolved solids. Do we have to worry about iron? All these questions come up, and people are a little bit overwhelmed with all the information. So what I want to do first, in the first 25 minutes, is talk about all of these components of a water test and what do they really mean for the end user. Okay, so let's start with turbidity. Turbidity is usually not on a water test. It's very rare that we see turbidity, but it can have negative effects on efficacy. Okay, so turbidity is usually a problem with surface waters, so rivers, ponds, and they're usually clay, silt, and organic matter. And there are two products for which turbidity is very important. They will actually bind, or glyphosate will bind to suspended clay and organic matter, and so will Reglone. These are some of our most charged products, very ionic, and they will get tied up. That's one of the reasons that under dusty conditions, glyphosate doesn't work as well either. It's usually, as I said, not tested for, but it's quite easy to see when you hold it up. And in fact, a lot of turbidity tests are just light transmission tests. There is a treatment for it. It's called aluminum sulfate. It's sometimes called alum. It's a coagulating agent, and it can be used to treat ponds and other standing bodies of water. Not recommended to be treating a tank full of water because the stuff that settles out does end up at the bottom. It can resuspend itself. Here's just an example of some jars that have aluminum sulfate in it, and it's just a kind of a time lapse. I think it goes from right to left, where things just become cleaner and cleaner as time goes on and they settle out. On our own farm, we've used aluminum sulfate on our pond, and we can test the fact that it works. It's a bit of a task to get it in there and to get it properly mixed. It has to be properly mixed up. They actually recommend a propeller like an outboard motor or something to get that in there. And then you have to wait a day or more for a default flocculation to be completed. The second thing to talk about, and really the first thing that's on most tests, and the one thing that I always start with on a test, is conductivity. Sometimes it's known as total dissolved solids. These are very closely related. And the conductivity refers to the sum of the charged particles. And those are ions: calcium, magnesium, iron, sodium, potassium, chloride, nitrates, sulfates, bicarbonates. All of these are charged molecules. That means that they can conduct electricity. And that's why conductivity is a good test. They may have a negative effect on mixing, and they certainly can have a negative effect on efficacy, but the spraying operation itself really has no problem with it. It's a big picture thing. If you have high conductivity, you should look further. If you have low conductivity, you really don't have a problem. You can pretty well stop there. And you'll find if you kept going, you'll find that your water won't be hard. It won't have sodium chloride in it. It won't have other problems because the TDS measures for all that. But if it is a little higher than about 500 parts per million, usually then I look further and say, okay, where is this coming from? Conductivity is measured in microsiemens per centimeter, and it is mathematically related to total dissolved solids by multiplying by about 0.6. Not always that exact number, but it's usually in that ballpark. So if you have one and not the other, they mean more or less the same thing. There's also other units. Sometimes it's described in decisiemens per meter and millisiemens per centimeter. So you have to get your decimal places correct to get that interpretation proper. The um, the next test that I look at is the pH. And you know that pH is a measure of how acidic or basic something is, and the target should be somewhere between 6 and 8. Very rarely do I see problems with pH. It's usually in that target range. And even if it weren't, the addition of the pesticide usually changes it anyways. So there's not much you can do. Obviously, you can buffer it, but there's usually not much you need to do. But mixing can be negatively affected by poor pH. and efficacy can be very negatively affected by poor pH, and we will get into that. So Jim says there's only two reasons to adjust pH and one definitely not to, and here they are. The first reason is to prevent something called alkaline or acid hydrolysis. So both of those are the breakdown of the chemical that you put in the tank, just a chemical reaction, and it's facilitated by extreme pH. Not a huge problem. We'll go into it. Second one is to improve the solubility and ease of cleanout. This is a very important one. Almost all of our herbicides have a pH-dependent solubility characteristic. In other words, if the pH is too high or too low, they don't dissolve well. If they don't dissolve well, they're going to be harder to mix and harder to clean out. And so they will persist and they will cause a problem when you next spray your sensitive crop. And so that can be actually quite catastrophic. So let's get into it. Here's a list I made of some common herbicides and the kind of pH that they have and the kind of solubility they have at different pHs. So the first one we'll look at is the yellow one, the Express, which is tribenuron. That's a sulfonylurea. Sulfonylureas are typically more soluble at high pH. You can see here at pH 7, 2,000 parts per million. But if you lower that to pH 5, it's just a small fraction of that. It won't actually dissolve. If you raise the pH, it'll dissolve quite a bit better. The same can be said for Simplicity and Frontline. So these are also group twos, and this time they're triazolopyrimidines, but they also have a very strong pH dependence on solubility. In some cases, for example, if you remember, Simplicity and some other group 2 products had solubility problems until they shipped actually ammonia or ammonium hydroxide with the active ingredients. And the idea was to put the ammonia in the tank first, that raises the pH, and then add the Simplicity, and that will allow it to dissolve much better. Okay, so even there, though, you do have a pH optimum. Too high a pH and the solubility starts to go down again. So there's a limit to what you should be doing. Frontline, same story. Interestingly, we have group 14 and group 27, even group 19 for that matter, not widely used. But look at the pH sensitivity. The reason I'm bringing heat into the equation is because, well, all of these really is that many of them are mixed with glyphosate, and glyphosate is an acidifier. So when you have a pH 7 water, or even pH 7.8 or whatever, glyphosate will typically lower that pH by 2.5 to 3 points. So pH 7.5 will drop to pH 5 to 5.5. So it acidifies itself. Now, if you add heat or Express or something like that, you will challenge the solubility of those products. And that's one of the reasons that group 2 persistence in, after spraying, say, a burn off or even in your cereals, it just simply has been exposed to the wrong pH and it will just hang up. So that's a real serious issue. I want to get to this whole thing about alkaline uh, hydrolysis. This is a list of insecticides from Louisiana State University that I got off Dr. Griffin's presentation. And if you look at the neutral pH here, you see that there is a half-life associated with all these insecticides, but most of these are actually not a problem. Most of them are hours or days. There's a possibility that we have a 12-hour half-life, uh, but most of them are stable or their half-life is measured in days. So if you have if you have to store a tank overnight, definitely acidification would be very good. You have longer, acidification's over here. You have longer half-lives as a result of that. But if you're going to spray that tank out, not to worry. Okay, so it's a little bit of an exaggerated problem. We do have a herbicide, chaperone. It's chlorimiron. Says there on the New Farm label, it will degrade in acidic or alkaline waters. So mix no more than use in one day, right? And so I think that's very sound advice for this. The third thing I guess it is now, I look at is the bicarbonates. So bicarbonates are a measure of the water's ability to resist a change in pH, or buffering agent, basically. And bicarbonates are often associated with hard water because they're often sodium bicarbonates or calcium bicarbonates. And the sodium and calcium components are also hard water components. So negative all the way around. So I have to be very careful there. We again have a 500 part per million threshold. So if it's greater than that, it'll inhibit 2,4-D, MCPA, chalcoxidum, sethoxidum, clethodim. Those are the classic DIM group ones. It can also cause high pH. It's a little bit of a chemistry lesson in a lot of these water tests. And in fact, AMS and urea ammonium nitrate 2800 can combat bicarbonate. So that's actually very positive news. Total hardness is the big one. And it's the last one, well, almost the last one I look at. And it is calculated from the calcium and magnesium part per million in the water test. But the effect, the hard water effect, includes other cations such as iron, sodium, and potassium. So those also matter, but they're not in the calculation. So definitely negative all the way around, except for the actual spraying process. The key ones here are glyphosate and glufosinate. Those are the big ones that it affects. But there's also 2,4-D amine, not ester, but amine, and dicamba. And the most common treatment is ammonium sulfate. Um, Ammonium in the AMS assists in the uptake of most herbicides. So you have the sulfate that ties up the hard water cations, and you have the ammonium that helps the herbicide get taken up across the membrane through ion trapping. Here's just an example about thiosulfate. Sometimes because ammonium thiosulfate, which is 120026, it's already in liquid form. It's a liquid ammonium, or sorry, sulfate fertilizer. It is antagonistic to many herbicides. So here's an example from Purdue University. So here's a grassy weed. They're growing untreated. Here's glyphosate, so some reduction. Here's glyphosate plus AMS, so better. That's your new standard. Now you add glyphosate plus ammonium thiosulfate at a low rate and at a high rate. Look at the antagonism. You add ammonium sulfate back into it can't overcome the antagonism. Another example. Okay, so I'm not even sure what that is, but it's a broadleaf plant. Glyphosate plus ammonium sulfate, good kill. Ammonium thiosulfate, all around antagonism of the herbicide. So be very careful with that product. Temperature is something I want to mention. It's typically when things are too cold, it's negative all the way around. It's things are harder to mix. It takes longer to mix. You can have a viscous film that forms that inhibits the pulse width modulation plunger or poppet movement. And we have seen them, if not seize up altogether, they do kind of slow their movement and you get an error signal. The only thing you can really do is take them apart and clean out the plunger and put them back together. So a lot of times when you're finished, say with a Liberty, a Centurion, Amigo mix, and if that's cold water high in bicarbonates, you could have these films form. It's really important to run a cleaner through your whole system and make sure your plungers are good to go. So yeah, I mentioned the high bicarbonates already. Now what I'd like to do is go through a few example water tests. Okay, so you will see these come back and hopefully we'll make some sense out of them. So obviously lots of numbers. Here's how I do this. I start by saying, all right, let's look at the pH. pH is 7.92. I'm not worried about pH anymore. Next, I look at both electrical conductivity and total dissolved solids. As you can see here, the electrical conductivity is 10,000 and the TDS is about 0.56 of that, give or take. So they're in the order of magnitude related to each other, as I said. This is a high number. Okay, so now I'm curious, what's causing this? So then what I'll do is I will go further and I will say, all right, the bicarbonates, not that high. So I'm not worried about bicarbonates. That's not what's causing this. Calcium, not that high. Magnesium, not that high. Sodium, very high. Okay, so then I go down. Potassium not that high, iron not that high, chloride very high. What do we got? Sodium chloride, table salt. That's what's in this water. So my conclusion is that the hardness might not be very high. It's 190 because it's calculated from calcium and magnesium, both of which are low. But you actually have a very high level of an antagonizing other cation. And for that reason, I would not recommend this water for spraying. It's just simply the hardness is good, but the rest of it not so good. Another sample. So here we have a pH of 7.75. I'm good. The conductivity, oh, this is millisiemens per centimeter. Okay, so that's 1,000 times lower than microsiemens. So we have to convert that. We go and we multiply that by 1,000. By 1,000, it's 41,000, and that's definitely a red flag. So now let's look at bicarbonate. That's actually okay. Let's look at calcium. It's high, but it's not terrible. Magnesium, potassium. Potassium is super high. Uh, I'm gonna have a look here, and I didn't highlight this, but follow me down to the bottom here. Chloride's also high. That's the that's the partner to potassium. This is potassium chloride. It's potash. You've got potash in your water. Okay, so it's a good fertilizer, maybe. But again, it's pretty hard, very high level of something you don't want. And I would say, do not use this water. Okay. Let's look at some more. Maybe we'll have some good news for a change. Again, pH, usually pretty good. Total dissolved solids, not worried about that at all. We can pretty well walk away right now. pH is good, TDS is good. Okay. Conductivity, so this is millisiemens, right? So if you multiply that by 1,000, that'll be 750. And again, that relationship, that 0.6 relationship exists. Bicarbonate, we're below 500. We're good. And then here's all the hard water. Calcium's not bad. It's up there, but it's not terrible. Magnesium's up there. Potassium and sodium are low. Total hardness is 450. That's manageable. Yes, you should do something, but it's not a big deal. Okay, so hardness is a little high from calcium magnesium, but otherwise this water is good. Put a conditioner in there. It can be AMS, could also be Choice, could be other products, could be Crimson, and use it for spraying. No reason not to. Here's a couple of samples from humidifiable water. So these are actually from the Peace River, Grant Prairie region. I was in Saddle Hills County actually last summer. Look at these numbers. pH is good. Conductivity is low, so not worried at all. We've got almost no alkalinity. We've got some calcium, magnesium, sodium, but not high levels. The total amount of hardness is 228. I'm good with it. I would say this is typical municipal water. It's good for spraying. It, I would say for spraying purposes, you can ignore this hardness level. There are spreadsheets out there that will say you should add some ammonium sulfate, but not much. Okay, so it's not if it is a problem, it's certainly not a big problem. Here's that spreadsheet we mentioned. So I already mentioned that we have a little thing on Spurs 101. It's how to interpret a water quality readout or test. If you Google that in the homepage of Spurs 101, you can download this spreadsheet. This is an Excel spreadsheet, and it uses coefficients that were developed by North Dakota State to determine how much ammonium sulfate you should add. So I took that last test and I said, look, these are the magnesium, calcium, sodium values that last water test we just looked at had. And in fact, the parts per million is the same. And you should only need about 0.86 pounds of ammonium sulfate, 210027 per 100 gallons. So not very much. Now, let's pretend for a second that we had something that wasn't in the hardness calculation. Let's go and make iron high. The iron does not change the hardness because it's calculated from magnesium and calcium, but it changes the ammonium sulfate requirement because it's extremely potent, has a high coefficient. So now we have to double the AMS. just because the iron is in there. So this spreadsheet's kind of useful for uncovering some of those issues. So I kind of like it for that. I would recommend that you use it. We have a slight conundrum, and that is before we had this spreadsheet, we went by sort of an on-off, a binary kind of a response. And that was if your hardness is less than 350 parts per million, milligrams per liter, that's parts per million, then your glyphosate, you're good. You're half a liter of original, you're good. But if it's more than 350, the half liter rate was an issue. Um, if you had a higher level of it, that's the 1 liter rate, perennial weeds, right? For annual weeds, the half liter rate, perennial weeds, that's the 1 liter rate. And basically that's the guidelines that we're using. So we said, don't worry about it if it's below 350 at all. But if you use that spreadsheet and you put in 300, you'll be adding AMS. So it's a little bit of a tool for the purchase and sale of AMS, unfortunately. Okay, last slide on the water quality. I just wanted to give you a picture of how this whole system works. So here's a water drop, and here are all the hard water cations in there. This is glyphosate. If you bring glyphosate in here, these hard water cations will bind to the negatively charged, and there's three of these in glyphosate, and they bind pretty hard. Okay, so this glyphosate now has changed its water solubility. It's also changed its ability to bind to this site of action because it's changed its shape slightly. And so it won't work anymore. Now, if you start over and you say, okay, we're going to add ammonium sulfate, it's the sulfate that actually preferentially binds with the calcium and magnesium, sodium and iron, and just forms an insoluble precipitate. So now the glyphosate comes back into the picture, and there's nothing to bind to its charged sites, and it'll work just fine. So that's kind of the principle of it. Hopefully that makes sense to you. We're also halfway through. So we've got 20 minutes left, and we'll do this for drones. Hopefully, I haven't seen any questions yet, so feel free to ask these questions, and I'll answer them as we go along. I want to just mention Jason DeVoe. Jason is my partner in Sprayers 101. He lives in Ontario, works for the provincial government there. Sprayers 101 is just a little project that we have. As I said already, it's paid for by your commodity groups. But we also use it to fund some of our work with spray drones, and Jason is taking the lead in this. So this is a spray rodeo that he held in Ontario, and they brought in helicopters and other sprayers. And the interesting thing here is I want you to look at the movement of the corn tassels as this helicopter flies over top. And if you missed that, I'll just do that again. And I think you'll agree with me that even though this helicopter creates a tremendous amount of downwash, it is not moving the corn. Why not? It's because that helicopter, I mean, this is slow motion, but that helicopter is probably flying around 80 miles an hour. The downwash it generates is diluted by its forward travel speed. So per square meter, not a lot of downwash. So if this helicopter flies over your head, it'll hardly tussle your hair. Same with a fixed wing aircraft. But if the helicopter hovers, it will blow the hat off your head. Okay, so the downwash is a function of forward travel speed. This is a drone on corn, and you can see how powerful the downwash, even from a little drone, can be. This is a drone on soybeans, and look at not only is there significant amounts of downwash moving the soybean canopy, it's also that the spray that the drone is emitting seems to land approximately the same time as the downwash does. So we have an issue where the downwash affects the distribution of that spray. And I want to keep that in the back of your mind because we're going to talk about that. First, though, a quick check on the benchmarks for spraying, productivity, water volume, spray quality, and deposit uniformity. We always like to test any system that we explore against these factors. On the productivity front, the average T50 drone currently is the label, the seller will tell you it'll do 50 acres per hour. That is pure spraying time if you never had to stop spraying for loading up. So that's an exaggerated number. The people that are actually using drones are seeing numbers like 20 to 30 acres per hour per T50 drone, depending on how much water they put on. But you will need a tendering system, and it'll be different from your other truck system. In this tendering system, you will have a water tank, but you'll also have a hot tank that's got the mix in it already. Okay. You will have a generator that'll fast charge the batteries. It'll be a 15 kilowatt minimum generator. And you will have a drone land here every 5 minutes. That's how fast they empty their tank. It depends on how much water you're using, but if you're using a 2.5 gallon per acre water volume, which is most common right now, because that gets you back and forth on a half mile on a reasonable swath width on a 40-liter tank. That's what most people are doing. Another example here is this one. This is the one that's being built right now by Fiber, and they have, of course, the dash systems. They want to have a system that lands 4 drones. Now you're going to be busy. Drone lands every 5 minutes. So if you have just say 2 drones, it would land every 2.5 minutes. You've got less than 1 minute to swap the batteries out and fill it up with liquid and send it on its way. You also have to manage the drone while it's flying. You have to have visual line of sight. So you actually need an operator that is separate from the person doing the filling and swapping. So it takes 2 people to do this. And remember, if you have a large sprayer, you're doing not 20 or 30 acres per hour, but you're doing 80 to 100 acres per hour, and you're a one man or one person operation. And I think that's a very significant difference. Also, you're only filling every half hour, so you do have time to recover from the trauma of it all. The water volume issue is very important. When we use traditional ground volumes, we have choices for water for spray quality. We have the option of going to a coarser spray if the drift is an issue or evaporation is an issue, and we still have decent coverage. If we have a low water volume, we just simply don't have a lot of choice. If we were to go to a coarser spray to reduce drift, we would not have droplets left. Okay, so it is a coverage issue, and we're basically forcing ourselves into a medium spray quality here. The rotary atomizers on drones are fantastic. I like them. This is the T40, T50 rotary atomizer. It has a little extra hood over top of the initial rotary disc that does secondary atomization. The issue with it is that it creates a finer spray than we probably want to see. Now, you can dial that down. You can use through software, say, okay, I want a 200 or 300, even a 500 micron drop. In our experience, when we did this test and we dialed it down, we didn't see as much change in droplet size as we wanted to see. And so we believe that the droplet size that DJI gives you is perhaps not the same as what we're used to from conventional nozzles. So the the most important part that you're going to be doing if you decide to use a drone is your swath width measurement. And that's an essential part of calibration. If you have a sprayer, a boom sprayer, it needs to know how wide that boom is. That determines your flow rate, right? If you have a drone, you need to know how wide that swath is. And you have to do that test under the conditions that are used in a spray operation. And here's a video of us doing it. So this is the XAG drone. We're flying fast, and we have this test paper underneath, and we look at it and we evaluate how wide that swath is. So that's a typical flying speed and flying height. There's another way of doing it. You can use water sensitive paper. We often put these on blocks, like these little wooden blocks here, and we'll space them out at a meter or so. And then you get a very quick visual. You do have to use clips because they'll blow away in the downwash. Lately, we've been using something called the Swath Gobbler. It's a commercial device that we can buy, and it uses this white receipt paper. And Jason here is just, threading it, I guess, on our first run. And then later on, we'll just reel it in. And when we then put dye into the spray tank, we fly over that Swath Gobbler. And as soon as we've done the pass, we excitedly run over to it and see what just happened. And because there's dye, we can see right away where the droplets went, how dense they are, and overall what the deposit appears to be like. We then will reel that in. This is Michael Reinke. He is with Michigan State University. He comes up for these trials sometimes, and he developed this track, which makes it a lot easier to reel the paper and really saves us a lot of time. So Michael's a very funny guy. I love working with him. So thank you, Michael, for that little innovation. We then take them into the lab, and here's the rolls of paper that we've assembled over the last few days, and we have to now scan them in. This swath gobbler scanner measures, counts the number of droplets per square centimeter, also the coverage, the percent area covered, and it does that every inch or every 5 inches or every 20 inches, depending on, excuse me, what you want it to be. We don't tend to calculate water volume, and that's because you can see the smearing of these drops. This just is another illustration of the turbulence. So you can see that droplets seem to be moving in a number of different directions, even in this tight space. So it's a fairly complicated flow field. To give you a benchmark of what's going on here, and apologies for the metric units here, but this is about 16 or so miles per hour, 17 miles per hour. We are driving a conventional sprayer. We have a 3-foot boom height. This is an R4045. It has an extremely coarse spray, the ULD 11004. We have a left wind at about 20 clicks, and it looks like this. This is the deposit. You can see the displacement from the edge where the wind blew it, but you can also see the ups and downs, pretty severe. This is rep number 2. You can actually now see wheel tracks in this case, also pretty strong. And this is the 3rd rep. So just to give you some idea, like it's not a horizontal line. It's not as good as we would like it to be, but this is what it is. Okay. Now a drone looks like this. Okay. And this is just a typical drone. This is not like we've seen better and we've seen worse. But I just wanted to show you that the overall pattern is, shall we say, not as good as we'd love it to be. There's 2 lines here, by the way. This gray line here is the deposit density. So that is droplets per square centimeter. And then this line here, the darker line, is the coverage, the percent coverage. So they follow each other, the trends, but the density is a little more sensitive to low when the deposit is low. There might not be any coverage, but you still have lots of droplets. Here's 3 reps that we flew, and these have a slight side wind. You can see this is, again, a heavy drone, a 4-liter tank. Fairly fine droplets in this case, 3-meter altitude, 2.5 gallons of water. And you can see that there's a little bit of a left-leaning breeze here, and it pushed the deposit over and created a big buildup here, and then it feathered out like that. Rep 1, this is 10 meters downstream. This is the same flight. Rep 2, and that's another 10 meters. That's rep 3. So significant variation in the deposit, but also significant, lack of uniformity, right? Over all the trials that we have done, I would say I would make these following conclusions. When we fly too low, which is tempting for drift, but it's actually a very bad idea, we don't give the spray a chance to spread out. It needs time, and that is height. The air blast is simply too strong beneath these rotors if it's too low, and it'll just carry all the droplets right into these peaks. We fly a little higher. In this case, we're flying with the wind. The pattern looks quite good. It's stylized, obviously, but it's widened out. Now, if we turn around and we fly against the wind into a headwind, the swath gets wider. It gets about 30% wider when we do that. And that's just aerodynamics. It also gets wider if we fly faster or if we use a smaller droplet or lower water volume. All of these factors make the swath wider. So swath width is not uniform. We recommend taking a side wind. You want to start at the downwind edge of a field. You want to turn into the wind. But the side wind then requires a swath displacement action, drift issues, all of these things matter. But look, at the reason we don't go into a head and tailwind is because there's a 30% difference in swath width when we do that. And I don't think that's acceptable either. That's like if you're driving your 120-foot sprayer down the field, it's 120 feet, but when you turn around, the outer sections automatically shut off, but you're still on 120-foot centers. It's just an unacceptable situation. Here's something we did in September. So this is a T50, 250 microns, 3 meter height. That's kind of recommended. Pretty fast, 18 miles an hour, 3 gallons. And we did these 3 reps in 3 different times of the day. This one is 1 p.m., part of a larger experiment. That's actually, I think that's a good pattern, guys. So we can measure the pattern width and say, okay, that's about 6.5 meters. And we then see, I see a question. I'll answer that right away. Um, we then have a 7 meter swath width on the second rep. That's about at 2 p.m., an hour later. And we have a 5 meter swath width an hour after that. That's 3 p.m. Okay, so quite changeable over time. But let's just turn to this question for a second. The question is, have you measured a larger area? I'm curious about the results if you measure middle swath on 3 passes. I assume the spray overlaps. You are 100% right. That's an excellent question, Jay. So the reason we haven't done that is because we just have limited time. Basically, that's the reason. What we do is we artificially put all of these together and we do the overlap. And I don't have that in this presentation, but what we basically do is we would say, let's take this one that we have here. We would take the same one and we would just put it adjacent to it, and we would move it over and we would add the amount of deposit that's there, and we would add it up, and then we would adjust the swath width until we have the best possible uniformity. So that's a great point, and that is part of the process. I took those slides out for the interest of time, and I regret that now. But that's I hope that answers your question, because yes, aircraft and drones alike um, do rely on that overlap. And you might see it, like if I go back, I'm just gonna go back here. You see how I drew that? I kind of went, okay, what's the average height here? And then I went from the edge and I followed the approximate path down this slope, okay, of the deposit on both sides. The the point of measurement here, that's the halfway point. Okay, so this height is halfway. That means if I were to put the same swath, it would feather out over here, and these halfway points would add up to the full. That's the point. So I think you understand that. Lance has a question. For a drone, would you recommend only spraying at night? Well, it is legal to fly drones at night. Um, so I don't love spraying at night because you are subject to inversions, and I think drones are very susceptible to suffering from inversions because they produce such fine droplets. So you may create a situation where you have a lot of droplets that just hang over that field the whole night, basically. And they might move off target in a very unpredictable direction the following morning when the sun rises, which is, that is the problem with inversions, right? So I don't think we should spray at night with drones at all, although it would solve the wind issue, but it's not a good idea. I hope that answers your question. Thank you for those questions, guys. Um, all right, let's move on. Here's something that was shared by Steve Lee. He's in Alabama at Auburn University. He's a great researcher. He's really focusing on drones. He sees a couple of things here. So you can see the difference in swath width, and you can see that the overlap probably isn't quite enough here. A lot of times when you are buying a drone from a reseller, they'll tell you that the swath width is, say, 30 feet or something, or they'll say everyone's using 30 feet but you really do have to measure it. In this case, if that was 30 feet, it should have been 25. It's pretty obvious that that swath width is too wide, and you've got striping and you've got a lack of good performance. Something really interesting that was done last summer in Manitoba by Corteva. So this is Kevin Falk. He's a researcher with Corteva and Carmen. He seeded soybeans on a research field, and he then made prescriptions. You can see these rectangles, and said, all right, I'm going to spray these with drones. and he hired this out to a professional applicator, and he brought his T40 drone. The wind was 4 kilometers per hour from the side, so very low wind. And he sprayed Launtrell. So Launtrell kills soybeans. What he was trying to do is see the effect on the soybeans. So 4 weeks later, he takes these aerial shots, and here's the individual passes. The applicator would have flown down the middle of these prescription rectangles. You can see it's a little mixed, a little bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes the drone's not spraying right away. He sprayed from north on the top to south. You can see the wastes I identified earlier on Steve Lee's picture. They appear here as well. Sometimes you have a very narrow swath. Sometimes you have a very wide swath. This is quite good actually here. And you can also see the overall displacement of the swath downwind. There might have been a small gust, another gust here. So even with an overlap, you would have gaps or you would have doubles in this case. So is that better than what you're currently doing is the question. Another issue that Jason identified is he measured the swath width of the T40 both in a crop and outside of a crop. And he felt that since we always tend to do it on a piece of grass or parking lot or something, we need to really look at the in-crop situation. So he set up a swath gobbler inside and said, all right, what is it? Here it is on bare ground, and here it is in the canopy. It's not unusual. Obviously, I expect there to be less droplets in the canopy. The canopy has absorbed some of them, but the swath width was also narrower. Okay, so we're seeing a 28% reduction in swath width. Similar numbers were true for corn and soybeans. So I think a very important observation. If you're spraying into a canopy with a fungicide, you ought to be measuring your swath width in that canopy. Drift, we talked about it here. We see it. This field was sprayed with a T30 glyphosate. These are edible beans. You can see the lack of maturity where the glyphosate drifted. It's a pretty serious case. This was settled out of court, but it was expensive. Let's recap a little bit, and I'm going to just bunch aerial and ground. I'm going to bunch aerial, crude and uncrewed, I guess. So planes and drones together. Um, Ground, you have decent productivity. We already mentioned 80 to 100 acres per engine hour are not uncommon for a modern sprayer. Depends how fast you fill. Aerial, 4 times as much. I mean, incredible productivity. For drones, about 1/5, 1/4 to 1/5 the productivity. Okay, so it is going to be challenging to find the times of day that you can fly drones safely with drift and all the other issues I already mentioned and get the job done. So more than one drone is probably necessary. Obviously, the wet ground advantage is huge for aerial. This is one of the reasons when I asked people, hey, are you happy with your drones? They said, we're super happy. I said, why are you happy? They said, well, we don't have wheel tracks. We were able to get into the wet ground, you know. We have to dig deeper, though. We have to say, well, how well did it work? I mean, that is the ultimate question. We have to work harder to get those questions answered. A ground does have less drift potential. And the aerial drift potential, we've measured drift from crewed aircraft. Some others have measured drift from drones. The amount of drift is 2 to 3 times higher from aircraft than from ground. And so that is going to limit the times of day that you can work. We don't have perfect swaths with ground, but we certainly have more uniform swaths than with aerial. Now, crewed aircraft, planes, helicopters are better. They have more uniform swaths. The pilots and the operators have worked very hard to improve their swaths. They go to calibration clinics where professionals measure their swaths and their uniformity, make adjustments to their aircraft to make them better. So I feel quite good about that system. Drones do not have that. You can basically buy a drone this morning, assemble it this afternoon, and fly it this evening. And you may not know what you're doing, but you're doing it. It's absolutely possible with drones. For ground, if we need more water, it's a reasonable option. Yes, we lose productivity, but we can do it. We have the tanks. For aerial, for planes, it's possible, but you have to have that conversation with the owner operator. They don't love that conversation because it slows them down and they have a long list of things to do. But on the other hand, um, they may be persuaded to do it with more money. Drones, not really an option. Uh, Remember that registrations are fewer for crewed aircraft and absent for drones. We still do not have an agricultural registration in Canada for pesticides. We have one herbicide, but it is an industrial application. It is Garlon XRT. It's imazapyr, woody perennials in rangeland, grassland rights of way. That's what that product does. So we do want to be mindful of that. I want to finish off with a glimpse into the future, and that is this. So this is a new drone. It's being manufactured right now. It's a big drone. It's heavy. It has a big pump. It has big water volumes. It has big productivity. It empties its tank in 3 minutes. It takes 1 minute to refill and to plug in recharge. So it has a large battery and it doesn't get depleted. It goes from 60 to 40% charge. And then you just basically top it up to 60. And that only takes the 1 minute. That increases the battery life cycle. It's expensive, but it flies about 60 miles an hour. And by flying that fast, you avoid the turbulent downwash because it's diluted by forward travel speed. It looks like a smooth line here, not perfect. You can use agricultural nozzles. You can use agricultural volumes or ground volumes if you want to, and it's a possibility. Look, we are in the early parts of the drone revolution. We are using drones that were developed for Asian rice fields. We're bringing them into North America and then saying, okay, how do they work on large acres? And they work, but they have problems. I think those problems are now evident, and we will see new drone developments that will cater to our needs. I would say, uh, I'm excited about drones, the potential for drones, but I would say it's a changing landscape and it's going to be different in a short little while. In summary, for drones, I think they have an edge. I think the low water volume issue is serious. I think that the spray swath width is our biggest issue. That's the main challenge, the uniformity and the width. And we are just at the beginning of this whole thing. So I see lots of changes. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to you, Alyssa, and just remind everyone, Spurs 101 is paid for by your commission dollars. Thank you for that support. We use it to develop content.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tom, for that fantastic presentation. I know I learned a lot, and I hope all of our participants did as well. There was a few great questions in there. We really appreciate you taking the time today to share your expertise with our members. I did want to go back really quickly to water quality. I just had one question for you. How often would you recommend testing surface water sources that you're utilizing for spraying?
So surface water tends to be soft. It tends not to have a lot of the water quality issues. So if you're talking about a dugout that you're collecting from snowmelt or water runoff, you can usually assume that it's going to be soft and it's probably going to stay soft. It's just simply not old water. It's new water. Its
Mhm.
hardness is a question of being in contact with rocks and in contact with rocks for hundreds of thousands of years, and it's just leaching of the stone into the water.
Okay.
Um, so if you've measured your water, tested your water every few years, I think you're probably going to be okay. Wells, I'm a little bit more skeptical about. They can be very variable. Under periods of low rainfall, you can get a change in the wells, and they will become harder or more full of solutes because the amount of water is less. So I think, let's say we're in a bad drought, you may want to have another look at your water at your well. Um, the tests are, I'm not sure how much they cost, but they're not very expensive and they have a quick turnaround. It's just so super instructive to see them. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. I just noticed one more question popped up from Lance. He's
Right.
just, yeah, wondering if there's any indication on what is coming up for spray drone legislation or herbicide registration.
Okay, so the herbicide registration, I would say we don't know much because it is proprietary information by the registrants. But here's what we do know. Corteva has said publicly that they want to pursue industrial registrations of some of their other Garlon family products. So they will continue to do Milestone and other things for industrial use. Drones have a very, very strong fit in the industrial marketplace. They can reach places you can't drive to, so that has a very good utility for them there. The one that we know is in under evaluation is a Delero fungicide by Bayer. They told us and made it public that they have submitted that for tar spot in corn, but I believe that Delero will also be labeled for other diseases, whatever the Delero label allows. Their label looks like it's going to be a 4 US gallon per acre label. I'm not sure about the spray quality. That'll be up to the regulatory agency on drift risk assessment. I'm a little bit surprised, to be honest with you, Lance, that we're not seeing a really long and obvious line of people queuing up to register their products for drones. I'm not sure why that is, but I would guess that it's because it might have something to do with the fact that they're looking at the upside. Are there sales in it for us? Are we missing out on the market? Um, or maybe are there headaches? And maybe do we want to be part, do we want to have those headaches, those growing pains? Um, so that is what it is. When we talk to the PMRA, they are still sticking by the decision that a drone is a unique form of pesticide application that requires its own separate risk assessment. And that means its own separate drift data set, its own separate efficacy data set, its own separate MRL data set, its own separate user exposure, bystander exposure, mixed loader exposure data set. I think that once maybe they have said this publicly, they have said at a recent conference that if they get, say, 20 registrations by drone and everything's working well, that they may consider grandfathering in other aerial labels for drones without that data set because it's been proven to be equivalent. But I would say we're some years away from that at the current pace of progress. Alyssa, you're muted.
Sorry for that. Thanks for answering that question. There's another one that came up here from Jay. I think the rotor wash helps push the chemicals into the crop canopy. Am I wrong?
No, Jay, you're right. And I think we're quite excited about that aspect of it, actually. Obviously, this is good and bad. And as I said, I believe the downwash is creating a lot of the turbulence issues and the uniformity issues that we're seeing because it is just simply so variable. On the other hand, pushing it into the crop canopy is such a positive development. Um, I think in talking to people like Steve Lee from Auburn, he's now thinking the faster we fly, the better. That's kind of his conclusion based on what he's seen. That will reduce the effectiveness of this downwash. So it's a double-edged sword, 100%. But I'm seeing niches for drones. Look at it this way. If you're working in the orchard air blast world, I know we're not, but if you were, I've gone to orchards and watched them spray. They're a ground-driven sprayer that has an axial fan that blows up into the trees. And so if there's no tree there and the sprayer's still on, it blows it into the atmosphere. It's like spraying upwards, right? It's kind of counter what we're trying to do in ag. Sometimes the spray misses the tree because it overshoots it for other reasons. If you fly a drone over the tree and you spray with air assist down into that canopy, you've got a good system. It's a better system, in my opinion. So there are these niches, I think, where the downwash could have really, really strong utility. So we'll see how things go. We don't have a good data set. I think that Jason, when they worked in the Delero registration, they have some canopy penetration data for corn, and I think I'll have to be careful that I say the right thing. I think it looks positive for drones. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Tom. We're out of time here now. I did want to say, Tom, you've mentioned it a couple times the great resources that you have on Sprayers 101. So I would definitely encourage all of our participants, if they're looking for additional information, to head over to the website there. So thank you again, Tom, for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, everyone.